A Love Worth Pursuing. Written by Fanny Finch and published by Starfall Publications. Save more with our offers and bundles on our website starfallpublicationsbooks.com. Subscribe for more audiobooks. Enjoy. Prologue. The morning was bright, with the sun shining down over the fields, homes, and a few inns and shops nearby. It looked so peaceful, out on the edge of the city. Of course, behind the tenements, the whole of London waited. Nancy Fletcher leaned her slim body against the doorframe, looking out with grey eyes at the scene before her. It was beautiful. Every morning was beautiful, and soon enough, everything was going to be new again. Her heart held so much hope for what things would be like once her husband returned from the war. Surely it would not be long now. Thomas would return soon, and they could finally begin their life together. Nancy missed him every day. She had been so fortunate to marry for love, but without Thomas, the days were only a shadow of what they ought to be. They had only had a week together before he was called to France. As if by magic, as if her thoughts had called him up, Nancy saw the figure of a man, a red-coat soldier. He was coming. Thomas had finally returned. Her heart pounded and a smile threatened to overtake her face entirely. "Thomas!" she shouted, running from the door and out into the street. It was not the most ladylike thing to do, but there was nothing that could stop her. Even as she drew near to him, Nancy began to realise that there was something wrong. Something about Thomas's gait was different. His frame was shorter and wider, his shoulders slumped, and that was when the awful truth struck her. It is not Thomas. Nancy slowed and then stopped altogether, standing along the path and staring at the man. He was watching her, continuing to draw near. "Forgive me," Nancy said. "I thought you were my husband." "I am sorry, miss. Are you, by any chance, Mrs. Fletcher?" the man asked. "Yes, I am," she said, confused as to why he would know her name. Had Thomas asked him to come and pay her a visit? Why had this man been allowed to come home first? He looked up at her with sad eyes, and Nancy ignored the sinking feeling in her chest. "I'm sorry to tell you, Mrs. Fletcher, but your husband was lost in battle," the soldier said. Frozen in place, Nancy said nothing. A strange, numb tingling ran through her limbs, and she didn't think that she had heard him correctly. "Nummer, that cannot be true," she said, her voice quaking and her knees unsteady. "I'm afraid it is, madam," he replied, handing her the uniform that had once belonged to the man she had placed all of her hopes in. The man sighed, somewhat impatiently. Nancy was still in shock. She felt nothing. She understood the words that he had said, but they made no sense to her. Whose uniform was she holding? It could not be the one belonging to Thomas. He was still in France, wearing it. "Because you are childless, you will only receive the one-time compensation. It is for your husband's service," he said indifferently, handing her an envelope. Thank you," she said through a ragged breath. The money was certainly no comfort. It was nothing to make up for what she had lost. Even if none of this felt real, she knew that much. The money was a hollow gesture. The army probably thought it was a kindness, but Nancy didn't see it that way. She and Thomas had hardly been getting by as it was, barely managing to cover Nancy's basic needs while her husband was away. "It's not much, but you are able to take up an occupation, are you not?" the man asked. Yes, I have one. I am a seamstress," she said. "Good. Then you will be all right," he said. Her work as a seamstress was sparse, and there was never any way of planning for the future when she was doing such an inconsistent job. But that was nothing compared to the pain of being without Thomas. "Well, have a nice day, madam. I am sorry for your loss," the soldier said reluctantly, walking past her and on toward his next stop. Nancy didn't move. She couldn't. She had only just found Thomas, married him, and now he was gone. She had lost him before their love had been given a chance to grow. In her hopelessness, she fell to her knees, alone. She couldn't say how long she kneeled there, collapsed in the middle of the quiet road. She only realised that her face was streaming with tears once she felt the sky crying in consolation, tears landing upon her head, upon her back, upon her hands. The weeping, the body-racking sobbing would surely come once the numbness wore off, and Nancy wanted to keep it at bay for as long as she could. She wanted to remain free of the horrors of it. She wanted to pretend that everything was fine until she could no longer deny the reality. With that, she decided to walk in the rain, into the streets of London, as the sky opened fully, unleashing her morning sobs with chokes of thunder and rages of lightning. Nancy allowed it to chill her bones. The maze of streets took her back toward the home that she and Thomas had lived in together for such a brief time, his family home. She was nearly there. And that was when she saw the figure of a small child, a girl, shivering from the cold, fragile, nearly starved. Nancy's heart was moved, and she approached the pale creature with her mass of red curls. The child looked up at her. "Where are your mother and father, dearie?" she asked. I have none," the girl replied in a high-pitched, shaking voice as her body trembled uncontrollably. And there it was, another spark of light, another way to keep the weeping at bay. Nancy held out her hand. Chapter 1. "Celia!" Nancy called, needing her little one to hurry. "Yes, Mummy? What is it?" Celia asked, rushing into the room. "I have to leave, dearie. We need to get you to Miss Winston's," Nancy said, grateful to her wealthier neighbour who always diligently watched Celia when Nancy went off to do her work. "Of course, Mummy. I am ready," she said. "Excellent. On we go," Nancy said. She led Celia to Miss Winston's and thought about the turn that her life had taken over the previous year. Raising a child had been no easy task, but as a woman who was all on her own, it had been even more of a challenge. Still, Celia had brought Nancy a great deal of joy. Nancy only wished that the Royal Army had given her a stronger allowance. Just because she had not had any children with Thomas didn't mean that she shouldn't be given enough compensation to take care of Celia. She needed to find better ways of feeding her little girl. Of course, even when the food was scarce, Celia was appreciative. She was such a sweet, humble child, and obedient. Sometimes Nancy could hardly believe how quick Celia was to listen and do what she had been instructed to. The two had bonded quite significantly in their time together. They arrived at the home of Miss Winston and knocked at the door. "Come in," the woman called from the other side. Nancy entered, followed closely by Celia. "Ah, good morning, darling. Are you ready for a lovely day?" Miss Winston asked Celia, who nodded in reply. "Thank you, Miss Winston, for watching her. Is there anything I can bring you on my way home?" Nancy offered. "Oh, nothing, thank you. I just have those shirts there that you can work on. Oh, what I wouldn't give to have nimble fingers again. But I did want to let you know that I heard about something that might interest you," Miss Winston said. "What is it?" Nancy asked. "I heard about a duchess. She is a friend of my aunt's, you know, the one who married a baron, who is looking for a new lady's maid. Apparently, her former maid died from—" At this, Miss Winston lowered her voice so that Celia would not hear. "Heart failure. After 10 years of service. It is just dreadful." Nancy blinked, thinking it sad, but not understanding why Miss Winston was telling her this. "I am not certain why you think this information would interest me," she said. "Why, I think you ought to reach out to the Duchess about the position, of course. Can you imagine what a wonderful opportunity that would be for you? And, of course, for your dear Celia. You would make a fortune, certainly more than you make at the moment, she said. Yes, I suppose I would. It sounds like it would be a very good opportunity, Nancy said, amazed that Miss Winston thought that she would be good enough for the role. You look perplexed, Miss Winston said. No, it is only that I never thought of applying for a position like that, Nancy said. Do you really believe that she would hire someone like me? I can't see why she wouldn't, Miss Winston said. And, if she did like me enough, would you be able to watch Celia for the whole day? As it is, you care for her when I am going to and fro, trying to find clothing to mend, but as a lady's maid, I imagine I would be gone a full day, Nancy said. Well, the Duchess does not live here. She is outside of London on a grand estate, Miss Winston told her. Nancy very nearly froze thinking about that. You mean the position would require that we move? She asked. It would, yes. If you wish, I would be more than happy to write to the Duchess on your behalf, Miss Winston said. Nancy thought about it as she went to get clothing from 2 different ladies for whom she mended. By the time she returned to pick up Celia, she had made up her mind. I would like it if you would contact the Duchess. It would be such a benefit to us if she is willing to take me into her service, Nancy said. I thought you would make the right choice. I shall let you know immediately once I have heard from her, Miss Winston said. Thank you, Miss Winston. Thank you for looking out for us, Nancy said. Nancy was eager to hear what the Duchess said. This was a position that could change everything, one that could save her life, as well as Celia's. 2 days later, Miss Winston came to her door. My dear Nancy, she has agreed, Miss Winston said. The Duchess? You mean that she has agreed to take me on as her lady's maid? Nancy asked, hardly believing it. Indeed, she has. And she is very much looking forward to having you work for her. Honestly, I believe that she is rather lonely, Miss Winston said. Nancy was thrilled by the prospect of having such a good position, but, more than anything, she was excited by what it meant for Celia. When they arrived at the estate a few days later, Celia clutched Nancy's hand. Will she be a nice woman? Celia asked. I am certain that she will. Don't lose heart, Celia. This will be good for us, you'll see, Nancy said. She leaned over and kissed Celia's rosy cheek, receiving a wide smile in return. Nancy looked up at the manor in awe, amazed by the vastness of the estate and land. It was beautiful, just 2 hours outside of London, and the grandness astounded Nancy. Nancy was anxious, hoping the Duchess would prove to be a good woman. She was filled with excitement, but also trepidation. If things did not go well, Nancy was worried that she would only subject Celia to even more hunger. The girl's frail body could hardly survive with any less than she was already getting. And if the harsh conditions of their home were not enough, what more could Nancy put her through? After taking a deep breath, Nancy knocked at the front door of the home. The butler answered and raised an eyebrow, looking at Nancy and Celia. It was quite clear that there was judgment passing behind those eyes, thoughts that said these 2 strange creatures were not quite beings of status, by any means. Oh dear, he finally said. I am sorry, miss, but we aren't given to accepting beggars in these parts. Nancy looked at her dress, the nicest that she owned. There was not a hole to be seen. She had even splurged by adding a lace trim to hide the worn edges of the hem. And Celia's dress was also in the best condition it could possibly be. I beg your pardon? Nancy asked. I mean, no offence, of course. It is only that this is the home of a very grand lady, not some minister who gives new rags to those who are wearing tatters, he replied, giving her that look again. Nancy could feel the rush of blood in her pale cheeks, furious and humiliated all at once. She put a hand to the blonde bun at the base of her neck, wishing she had the means of adorning it with a lovely clip or something to enhance her appearance. "I am told that the Duchess of Ridlington has accepted me for the position of a lady's maid," she managed to say through a tense jaw and rigid lips. The butler took in a sharp breath. Oh, you are her new companion, and you come with a pet of your own, I see. Well then, in that case, the Duchess is in the garden, and I shall show you to her," he said. Nancy pushed aside her new misgivings, thinking this the better option. This man had been rude, but she believed in the importance of giving him a chance to show that he was better than her first impression. When they reached the garden, they saw the Dowager Duchess of Ridlington, Florence Tilbury. She looked marvellous in her deep blue dress, made of taffeta or some such grand fabric. She sat at an iron table, ornate with little swirling details, drinking tea. Nancy could hardly look away from her. "Ah, and this must be Mrs. Fletcher and her young darling. Miss Celia, I am told," the Dowager Duchess asked, standing to greet them. "Indeed, Your Grace," Nancy said, curtsying and side-eyeing Celia to tell her to echo the movement. "Wonderful. Welcome to you both," she said, smiling at Celia. Nancy glanced at Celia, who was looking in wonder at the beautiful gardens around them. She was being quiet, but her green eyes marvelled at everything she saw. "Now, you must take a seat," the Duchess said, gesturing to the other seat at the table. She nodded to a maid, who rushed over with 2 more cups of tea for Nancy and Celia. "Thank you, Your Grace," Nancy said, surprised by the gesture. She had not expected a Dowager Duchess to be so humble as to serve tea and drink it with her, and, after the encounter with the butler, she was especially surprised. "Now, I shall tell you a little bit about myself, and you may tell me about yourself in return. What do you think?" the Dowager Duchess asked. "Yes, certainly," Nancy agreed. "I, myself, am a widow. My son was with me for a time, but he has gone to the West Indies. Therefore, I am glad to have a new companion. 2 new companions, rather," she said, grinning at Celia once more. "Anyway, you already know, I suspect, that my husband was the Duke of Ridlington, a title that my son has since taken on. And you? Tell me about yourself, Mrs. Fletcher," she said. Nancy took a deep breath and nodded. "I, also, am a widow. My father was a miller, who passed away a few years ago, and my mother died when I was a child. At 18 years of age, I married a man that I loved, but he went to France just a week later, for the war. I was informed a year ago that he was lost in battle," Nancy said. "That is a very difficult life. You must be quite strong to have borne such troubles," Her Grace said. "I like to think so," Nancy replied, a soft smile on her face. "And what of you, my dear?" the Duchess asked, turning to Celia, who was being as proper as she was able. Celia held her teacup with both hands in an effort not to spill anything. Nevertheless, Nancy could see that, while she had been distracted by the conversation, Celia had put enough sugar in her cup that it had not yet even melted. My name is Miss Celia Fletcher," she said in a very enunciated way, trying to be as diligent and polite as she could. "Yes, and you have lovely eyes, Miss Fletcher," Her Grace said, causing Celia to blush. "Thank you, miss," Celia said. Nancy froze. "Celia, dear, we must address the Duchess as Your Grace," Nancy said, kindly. "Oh, please don't worry about it. I am an old lady, and I don't mind in the slightest if my title is forgotten. Anyway, I have to say that I like both of you a great deal, from what little we have spoken. I cannot think of anyone I would rather have in my employ," Her Grace said. "Really? You want us to live here with you?" Nancy asked, amazed by the opportunity. "Yes, indeed. I do need a lady's maid, but I rather miss the company as well. I can think of no one better than the likes of you two," she said. Nancy looked at Celia, and they smiled at one another, both knowing precisely what the other was thinking. "I believe," Nancy began, "that we are in agreement. We would love to be your companions." Chapter 2. Vincent took a deep breath and let it out slowly, mentally saying his farewell to the sea. As his green eyes took in the sight of London's docks, he recognised the same bustling energy that he had missed over the previous 2 years, the same culture of the labourers at work, and the smell of cabbage and meat pies that wafted toward him from where some of the dock workers were sitting and warming their food over a little fire pit. It was good to be home. More than anything, it would be lovely to see his mother again. Surely she was ready to see him as well. Vincent hoped that she had received his latest letter telling her when he expected to arrive, but it was Leighton who greeted him as he walked the plank down from the ship. "Ah, Leighton, thank goodness you have come," Vincent said, patting his rather long and lean friend on the back. "I have been keeping my eyes open for you. Old Fisher came back yesterday and said that you were only a day behind him in departing. I thought it best that I come to the docks just in case," Leighton said. "And how has it been since you returned home?" Vincent asked. Leighton shrugged. "As well as you might imagine. The West Indies are a good investment, and trade is a wonderful business, but there is nothing like coming home. It is good to be away from those ports, so unlike our own, and what would you call them? Hostiles? The bargains that we so often are stuck dealing with. We are free of that discomfort when we come home," Leighton said. "I could not have put it any better, my friend. It was difficult when you left a few months ago. I cannot tell you how lonely I was at times," Vincent said. "Yes, I am sure. And it was a long journey, was it not?" Leighton asked. "Oof, long enough," Vincent replied, laughing. "Well, then you must come to my home. Would you like to spend the evening?" Leighton asked. "As honoured as I would be to dine with the Marquess of Oakshire, I fear that I ought to be getting home," Vincent said, grinning at Leighton. "Ah, yes, of course," Leighton said. "I would like to see my mother," Vincent explained. "I understand perfectly, and I am sure that she is eager to see you again as well," Leighton said. Vincent was certain that his mother would be painfully hurt if he did not go visit her upon the first day of his arrival. It was only right that he make his way to the family estate, even if it was an extra 2 hours on top of the journey that he had already taken. "Would you like my coach to take you to the estate?" Leighton offered, as though reading his mind. Vincent asked. "Your estate? It is far out of the way. I would appreciate it if you allow my driver to take you. I would be happy to escort you myself. I have plans out that way as it is," Leighton told him. "But it is so far from your own home. Are you not staying at the townhouse in London?" Vincent asked. "I have a good deal to tell you. I am heading that way as it is, and I think it would be the perfect time for us to catch up," Leighton said. Vincent smiled and shook his head. "So, it appears that much has happened in a matter of months?" he asked. "More than you can imagine," Leighton replied. They gathered Vincent's belongings and carted them to Leighton's coach. From there, they set out on their journey. Although he was eager to learn what news Leighton had, Vincent wanted a moment to simply take in the scenery of England, from the chaos of the city to the long, winding roads of the countryside. It felt good to be back on solid ground. He had not expected to miss England so much. After all, going to the West Indies had been a grand adventure, something that he had not had such an opportunity to do before, a dream of travel and excitement that most men only longed for. But now that he had returned, Vincent appreciated everything his eyes took in. Every last detail was more beautiful than the last. "I can see that you missed it dearly," Leighton commented, snapping Vincent from his dreams. I can hardly express how much. And you? How has your life been since your return? What is all of this news and change that you have to report? Vincent asked. Leighton leaned back further in his seat, a contented grin on his face. As it happens, it is rather convenient that you have arrived just now, Leighton said. I am betrothed. I shall be getting married in a few weeks. Really? That is wonderful, Vincent exclaimed. He was thrilled for Leighton's sake. Leighton had always yearned to have a family, and he was such a good and loyal man that it was wonderful to hear he would finally have the thing that he so desired. That is truly amazing, Leighton. I am happy for you. Congratulations. When do I get to meet her? Vincent asked. Well, you ought to get settled in first, but we can see to the meeting in the next few days. I truly believe that you will like her. She is such a good woman, and she makes me very happy, Leighton said. In that case, I have to meet her as quickly as possible. Now, what else has been going on in London while I have been away? Vincent asked. Leighton filled him in on a few things that had occurred since his own return to England. He shared about some of the parties and a little bit of gossip. There had been some exciting developments in the great kingdom, and Vincent was happier than ever that he had returned. Having been gone for such a long time, Vincent realised that he had missed out on the parts of home that made it so pleasurable. Nevertheless, he had finally returned, and he was not going to miss out on anything more. He would enjoy the balls and the gatherings with all of society's finest. He would be with his mother, indulging her and reminding her of how much he cared. He would be able to go to Leighton's wedding, seeing his dearest friend happily married off. Finally, looking out the window to gauge how far they had come, Vincent's heart seemed to skip a beat when his eyes took in the sight of his family's estate. What is it? Are we almost there already? Leighton asked. It hardly feels that we have had enough time. Please, do let me know as soon as you are able to spend some time together. I should very much like to introduce you to my betrothed. I shall let you know the moment I am free, Vincent said. The coach led him right up to the front door of the estate, and Vincent turned to Leighton. Will you come inside? Just for a while, he said. I have dinner plans, as I said. Madeline's mother and father live just beyond here, and I am meeting with them. I shall write to you tomorrow, however. You have my word, Leighton promised. Understanding that his friend certainly needed to be getting on his way, Vincent nodded. A sigh escaped him as he did. I am sorry, truly. I would love to spend more time with you, Leighton said. It is perfectly all right. You offered for me to stay at your home for the night, and I am not able. I can hardly blame you for not being able to stay the evening at my home. We shall see one another soon enough. Now, enjoy your dinner, and I wish you all the best with your future bride and her parents, Vincent said. With that, Vincent got out of the coach, and the coachman helped him unload a few things and brought them to the door. Vincent knocked, straightening his jacket and hoping that he was presentable. He watched Leighton's coach depart and then turned back to the house as the door opened, the maid's eyes turning bright upon seeing him. Your Grace! How lovely to see you! Tobias shall get your things, she said, ushering the valet over. Thank you, Bessie, he said, smiling as the staff welcomed him and helped carry in all of his belongings. Vincent could hardly wait to see his mother. He walked into the house, knowing that his arrival would be a surprise to her if she had not received his letter. It had been such a long time since they had seen one another. With that, Vincent meandered down the main hallway, assuming that his mother would be in the parlour. But just as he was scheming how to surprise her, he heard a strange laugh. Not strange, just misplaced. It was the laughter of a child. Vincent's heart raced all over again, wondering what on earth had changed that there would be a child in the home. In a strange and overwhelming panic, Vincent called out, "Mother! Chapter 3. It took only a few days into her employment for Nancy to recognise that she had made the right decision. This was where she and Celia belonged. There was no doubt. They were given a room to share, but it was large enough that Nancy wondered if it had been meant for a guest rather than an employee. The washroom was even extravagant, and Nancy could hardly believe that she and Celia had ended up in such a grand place with such a fine woman as the Dowager Duchess of Ridlington. They had 3 full meals each day, tea at any time they wished for it, and the lovely, generous garden in which Celia loved to play. It was far grander than anything that Nancy had anticipated, and she hoped that their stay was not going to come to an end any time soon. In the past 6 months, she had managed to see that this was exactly what they had needed. However, she had also learned rather quickly that the Duchess was one of a kind. Not everyone was so humble as she was, certainly not everyone who was of such a position in society. The butler had become a very decent man with time, but many of the visitors who arrived were pompous, assuming, preening members of society who considered themselves perfection. But in nearly 6 months together, Nancy had been able to handle every little bit of arrogance that was directed her way from others, even when it came from the Countess, Lady Clearburn. One morning, Lady Clearburn entered the parlour, where Nancy had been sitting with the Duchess, mending some clothes, and barely gave a greeting before she began barking orders. "Here, you can stitch this for me as well," Lady Clearburn said, handing Nancy her purse without so much as a hello. Nancy took it and set it beside the other items that she was working on for the Duchess. She was more than accustomed to the Countess by now, understanding that the wife of the Earl of Clearburn was never going to treat her with niceties. "Pour me some tea, quickly," she said to one of the maids, who was already bustling off. Lady Clearburn smoothed her black curls away from blue eyes that were buggy in her rat-like face. She was a small woman, and not altogether as beautiful as she hoped to be. It was apparent from her overuse of jewels to enhance her appearance that the Countess was aware of this. "Good heavens! How long does it take to pour tea? And have you seen the dust on the mantel over there? Your Grace, I cannot fathom what it is that you pay your staff for. This room is an utter disaster," Lady Clearburn said, ensuring that the maid was listening to every remark. The Duchess simply watched her friend, patiently waiting until she had finished. "Now, Cynthia, are you quite at ease?" Her Grace asked, sounding somewhat amused by her friend's behaviour. She held up a hand for the maid to stop as she started over to the mantel. "Oh, who is ever at ease? What with the cold weather and incapable servants everywhere you go, it is a wonder that I have lasted so long in this country," Lady Clearburn said. Nancy leaned back, trying to finish the hem that she had offered to stitch that morning. But, unless the Duchess needed anything more, she was happy to sit and listen to the conversation. They discussed the usual topics for women of their age: rheumatism, the difficulty in finding a decent tuner for the pianoforte, whose daughter had secretly been harbouring a scandalous lifestyle. It was certainly a different world than anything Nancy was familiar with. She had heard a number of conversations between the Duchess and her friends, but it was Lady Clearburn who always seemed to be trying to prove herself. Her worth was so clearly tied up in what society thought of her that Nancy wondered how she had managed to con anyone into thinking that she was reasonable at all. And if her Grace considered her a friend, did that mean that perhaps she had a hidden version of herself similar to the Countess? Nancy had not seen it, but she hoped that she never would. "And how is your son, Florence?" the Countess asked, mentioning the young man that Nancy only heard of now and then. "Oh, I have heard the most wonderful news. I received a letter just yesterday that he is homebound. Finally, after 2 years of not seeing my boy, he is returning to me, "At last," Her Grace announced, the joy in her face undeniable. She clapped her hands together to show her delight, and Nancy was overjoyed to see the Duchess so happy. It warmed her own heart, and she thought that it must be a good sign that Her Grace had a solid relationship with her son. "That is grand news, my dear. We must have dinner together upon his arrival. I am certain that it will be good for him to be back home and enjoying England after living among the heathens," Lady Clearburn said. "After all, this is a civilised society, unlike that place." "They have their own form of civility, I am sure. It is just different than ours," the Duchess said. "Oh, do not try and defend them. They could have had all of the bounties of Europe if not for their rebellion. Anyway, we must have a fine dinner," the Countess said again. "Yes, indeed. Once he is settled from his long journey, we shall do just that," Her Grace said. Nancy was excited for Her Grace to have her son home. The woman had so frequently mentioned him, but it was always in short little bursts. It had felt as though the Duchess longed for his return, but speaking of his absence was too painful to indulge in much. And yet, Nancy was also horrified by the way Lady Clearburn spoke of his journey. She was far too cruel, not seeing the value in the lives of those who lived abroad. Surely Nancy knew nothing of those lands, but she could hardly imagine the people were all that bad. She also couldn't imagine that the Countess knew much about foreign lands either. It wasn't as though she had ever travelled to the West Indies or seen what it was really like. The woman could hardly make an accurate judgment on the people before her own eyes, let alone those half a world away. "I do dote on him, you know, your son. He is the loveliest boy, always has been," Lady Clearburn remarked, looking truly eager. Nancy could hardly imagine Lady Clearburn doting on anyone. She was a woman entirely too captivated by herself to take an interest in anyone else. "Yes, indeed, I am well aware. I am quite a lucky woman to have such a son," the Duchess commented. "You are. He has always impressed me, his character and his good looks, just the sort of young man anyone would be proud of," the Countess said, surprising Nancy with her compliments. "He looks like his father," Her Grace sighed. "I think he rather looks more like you, Florence." "Oh, I don't know. I never have been very good at those types of judgments. Anyway, I am already making the grand plans for a dinner party, so you had best not keep me waiting once he arrives," Lady Clearburn said. Just then Celia came bouncing into the room and, seeing the Duchess, rushed to her, embracing her in a hug. Her face was lit up until she buried into the torso of her newest favourite friend. It warmed Nancy to see how well the two got along, and how comfortable Celia was with Her Grace. The Duchess accepted the hug heartily, grinning, and giving Celia a gentle squeeze. She was like the grandmother that Celia could not remember ever having had. How dare this peasant child come and go as she pleases? Does she think that this is an appropriate way to behave before a duchess? Lady Clearburn demanded, her voice tinged with disgust. She is no peasant child, Cynthia. She is the sweetest little girl, and I am rather happy to indulge her. As for my own title, it means very little to me, and I would rather you did not let it fool you into thinking I am of any importance, the Duchess said, giving Celia a kiss on the cheek. With that, she held Celia's little hand in her own for a moment, a sign of comfort and affection that Celia took greedily. Nancy saw the sneer on Lady Clearburn's face. She was appalled by poor Celia, with her wild red hair that Nancy found so lovely. It made her wish, more than ever, that she could protect Celia from the cruelty of the upper classes. Now that they were happy, she could not bear to subject the child to the harsh reality that they did not belong in magnificent estates such as this one. They had been fortunate so far, knowing that the Duchess of Ridlington was a kind, genial woman But there was no promise that things would not change, or that influences like the Countess of Clearburn would not cause the Duchess to second-guess her decision. Was it possible that she would also prove to be moved by the whims of society, or were they going to be fortunate and find that she was stronger than the opinions of others? Nancy heard the sound of someone's footsteps in the hall and assumed that it must be the valet or some other man who worked at the estate. For Celia, however, the curiosity was too great, and Nancy saw it in her eyes even before the child broke free from the Duchess's arms and ran off to see who it was. "Celia, don't run! Come here," Nancy said, calling after the child, but it was too late, and Celia was already gone. She turned to the Duchess and Lady Clearburn. "Please excuse me for just a moment," she said. As she rushed out the door, she heard the Duchess call after her, "Oh, just let her play for a while." But already Nancy's eyes were shocked by the image before her. Chapter 4. Suddenly, the laugh that Vincent had heard was accompanied by a face. A little girl with bright green eyes was before him, giggling as she ran past, bumping his legs as she did. "You can't catch me!" she squealed. Vincent turned in surprise, wondering where the child might have come from. Who was she? Why was she here? The little girl ran back to him and wrapped her arms around his legs. She looked up at him with a beaming smile, missing a few of her teeth where their replacements had not yet grown in. It made for quite a charming little grin. "Well, hello there," he said, still in somewhat of a daze. "Hello," she said, laughing in reply. "Mother!" Vincent called out again, unable to turn himself as the child had him in her grip. Alas, the sound of footsteps behind him caused Vincent to turn. There was his mother, as well as a younger woman with a pretty face. He looked to his mother, bending himself to do so. "Is there something you need to tell me?" he asked humorously. His mother laughed, but it was the other woman who spoke first. "Celia, come here," she said in a gentle yet firm voice. "We mustn't disturb this man." She was dressed as a part of the staff, but Vincent had never known his mother to hire a maid who had a child. Not only that, but the woman and the child did not resemble one another at all. No, there was definitely something here that he was missing. "Vincent, my boy, I am so happy to have you home at last. Come, you must meet Mrs. Fletcher and her dear little friend," his mother said, embracing him and then leading him to the woman and the child. "Nice to meet you," Vincent said, bowing. "And you, Your Grace," the young woman replied, with a curtsy that the child replicated. "Mrs. Fletcher is my new lady's maid," his mother said. It was a surprise to hear. He was perfectly happy to meet this new young lady, but he needed a more detailed explanation than that. "Mother, what happened to Olivia?" he asked, concerned. His mother's gaze turned sad. "Come, let us have some tea, and I shall explain all of it," she said, leading him away. Vincent nodded and looked back at the woman, who was now holding the child's hand. She was certainly lovely. The clothing that she wore was hardly a proper representation of who she appeared to be. She didn't seem to be like any other lady's maid that he had met before. He had always found Olivia to be somewhat interesting. As a woman who had been raised by her father and brothers, she had often lacked the delicacies of manners and was not always proper in front of guests. However, this woman, Mrs. Fletcher, was different. She looked respectable and used impeccable manners. Then again, he had only barely glanced at her. Who was he to pass these judgments? He entered the parlour and was greeted by none other than Lady Clearburn. They spoke briefly, but he was relieved when she excused herself in order to give him time with his mother alone. As they enjoyed their tea, his mother began explaining all that had occurred in his absence. "Mrs. Fletcher has been with me for the past 6 months. She is quite a lovely young woman and very considerate. She has a good temper and excellent manners, she explained. Well, that is very well, but what about— As for Olivia, his mother said, holding up a hand to stop him from speaking. For a moment, she was choked by emotion, and Vincent realised that whatever had taken place, it was not good. Olivia passed away. It was her heart, you see. It was devastating. I was in mourning for 3 months, trying to convince myself that I did not need anyone else, that I should simply continue in my sadness over the loss of someone who meant so much to me, she said. However, I quickly found myself. What I mean to say is that you were not here, and Olivia was gone. I was quite lonely, she confessed. Vincent hung his head. I am sorry, Mother. I am sorry that you were on your own here for so long, left behind as I was away. I must admit that I have missed home a great deal, Vincent told her. His mother took his hand and gave it a squeeze. Well, you are here now, she said. Yes, I am here, he replied, hoping it was a comfort. Now, I am sure that you are wondering about the child as well, his mother then said, seeming to read his thoughts. Of course I am. You cannot expect me to return home to find that you have a child living with you and not be utterly astonished, he said with a laugh. His mother chuckled as well and nodded. Yes, well, I dare say that little Celia was a part of the reason that I was so eager to hire Mrs. Fletcher. I must confess that I adore having a child around, and it brings me a good deal of happiness to see that little girl every day. I feel youthful again whenever I am around her, his mother said. Mother, you are quite young as it is, he pointed out. Yes, but it is not the same, she said. The girl, she is Mrs. Fletcher's daughter, Vincent asked outright. He wanted answers regarding all of this strangeness. Not her daughter, no, that is, not biologically, she said. Vincent was more confused than ever at that statement. Mrs. Fletcher found Celia cold and deprived of food on the streets alone. It was a rainy day from what Mrs. Fletcher has told me, and Celia was shivering, trying to scavenge. From what little she has pieced together, Celia does not know the identity of her true mother or father. She was being cared for by a woman who passed away from typhoid, but nothing more is known about her identity, his mother said. Vincent breathed deeply, analysing what his mother had told him. If Mrs. Fletcher had spoken truthfully, it was a very admirable deed that she had done, but it was also quite strange. Did she even have the means to take care of herself before coming to work for his mother? Why would she have taken in a child? Or had she taken Celia in just for the sake of pity? Was she using the child in order to get what she wanted from others? There were certainly those out there who would be so cold as to use a child in order to benefit themselves. He eyed his mother with concern. She had often been too trusting in the past, and this sounded like quite a dramatic story. He began to question its levity, thinking that his mother may have been too gullible in believing it. Mother, he began, uncertain how to ask the right questions. I did not mention that Mrs. Fletcher is a widow. Her husband was a regiment soldier. He passed away in the war, having gone to France a short time after they married, she added. At this news, Vincent softened. If Mrs. Fletcher was a widow who had taken in a child, of course she was in dire need of employment. He felt somewhat ashamed of having been so quick to doubt her story. Well, Mother, it appears that you are quite happy with this whole arrangement, Vincent said. Yes, indeed I am. Besides, it is wonderful to have the laughter of a child in the house. It gives this space life again, you know. That is something that I have long forgotten, ever since you decided to grow up, she said, adding the last part teasingly. Ah, yes, what a cruel thing to do to you, Vincent said, although he really did feel quite guilty. He had left his mother alone after his father had passed away. It had been the best thing for him. It had given him a bit of space and freedom, two things that he had greatly needed at the time. But for his mother, it had been quite different. He had never stopped worrying about her, and now she was confirming that he had been right to have concerns. It was painful to know that she had been so lonely while he was away. Vincent began to wonder if he had made a mistake in leaving, no matter how beneficial it had been for him. Anyway, I am glad that they are here and that I am able to indulge a child for the time being. It does bring me joy, his mother said. In that case, I trust that you have made the right choice in hiring Mrs. Fletcher and bringing the two of them here, Vincent said. Yes, indeed, and you must tell me more about your own adventures. You have heard the boring tales of an old woman. What about those of a young man of adventure and excitement? She asked. Vincent leaned back and brushed a bit of dust from his shirt, a reminder of the lengthy travel. The West Indies are a unique place, and while they are not the place for any temperament, there are many reasons to be happy there, Vincent said. Such as? What did you like? What did you dislike? His mother asked. Vincent chewed the inside of his cheek while considering her questions. His feelings on the matter were rather complex. It had been home for him in some ways. He had real emotion connected to aspects of his life, a fondness for the simplicity and quiet. And yet, it had also been gravely difficult to be away from everything he knew. Vincent could hardly pretend that he was always happy there. Well, I ought to tell you my least favourite parts first. The storms. The storms could be terribly brutal, with waves higher than any clock tower, and the differences in culture with the people. Always wondering if I was saying the wrong thing, or might offend someone or be offended when that was not the intention, Vincent said. But there were many things that I appreciated. My home was not a grand one. Of course, the English have built fine homes for ourselves, in comparison to those in which the natives live, but it was small and simple compared to here. I rather felt comforted in the smallness, he told her. And the food. What was it like? She asked. Excellent. I was able to have some version of English food often, but I was fond of the local cuisine as well, he told her. Well, if you have not had a proper British meal in quite some time, I do think we ought to make our way to the dining room. Lunch should be ready soon enough, she told him. Vincent followed his mother, and they arrived just in time for the meal. They passed his mother's new companion and her little girl as they went. He imagined that they would be eating with the other staff once he and his mother had finished their meal. But as he and his mother ate and chatted away, he was still curious. Much had changed in his absence, but Mrs. Fletcher and Celia were the most interesting of all. Chapter 5. So there she was, the young maiden, dancing about with the fairies under the sky, and everything was at peace, Nancy said, finishing the story. That is a lovely tale, Celia said, her eyes groggy as she lay in bed. Will you sing me a song? Nancy smiled and nodded. Celia always wanted a song as she drifted off to sleep. A little girl with sleepy eyes laid down to rest under the sky, and as her eyes then drifted closed, the moon and stars so vast arose, and as the little girl did sleep, under the moon without a peep, the moon and stars began to scheme, to grant the little girl's big dreams, Nancy sang. Before she finished the song, Celia was completely lost to her rest, and Nancy quietly stood and made her way to her own bed, where she tried to get to sleep herself. She had so much love for Celia, and caring for her felt effortless at times. But how could she feel anything other for a girl so kind, gentle, and appreciative? She was a dream child to take care of. Of course, it was not only Nancy who had realised that. The Duchess had also come to care deeply for Celia. It was amazing to watch a Grand Duchess spoil a child who had lived on the streets for such a long time. But some of the greatest joys that Nancy had seen was watching how Her Grace taught Celia to play chess and the pianoforte. Celia was a fast learner, having already mastered one song. The Duchess had been so generous to them thus far. In addition to the grand and spacious room that left them so comfortable, she had given them care and attention and a value that they would not have found anywhere else. As she closed her eyes to sleep, Nancy felt incredibly blessed. Nancy was up early the following morning. She assisted the elder Duchess of Ridlington in dressing and served her tea in the parlour, enjoying their conversation as she went about her duties. "Ah, and here is my boy," the Duchess exclaimed, looking effervescent from the joy that was clearly in her heart. "Good morning, Mother," he greeted. "Good day, Your Grace," Nancy said, curtsying. He eyed her for just a moment before responding in a serious tone, "Good day." Nancy took a step back, trying to stay out of the way of the two, well aware that she ought not to take up too much space when the Duke of Ridlington was present. It was clear that he wanted to be with his mother alone, and yet it was Nancy's duty to be there for Her Grace in case she needed anything. "So, I suppose I ought to fill you in on some of the latest news coming from London," Her Grace said. "You are still paying attention to all of that from here?" the Duke asked. "Well, I must keep up, mustn't I? And your friend, Lord Oakshaw. Have you heard the news?" "Oh, of course you have. You said that he was the one who brought you home yesterday," she said. "Yes, Mother, I have heard. I am so happy for him," His Grace said. Nancy knew nothing about Leighton Chadwick, the Marquis of Oakshaw, but she listened anyway, learning more about the strange lives of nobility and what few concerns they seemed to have. "It is such a joy that he has found a good woman. He is like another son to me. Oh, how I wish you would also find a lovely bride, Vincent. You should bear me a few grandchildren. That is the only thing that an old woman like myself has to look forward to," his mother said self-deprecatingly. But her son scoffed and then sighed. "You have a child in the house now, Mother. Little Miss Celia, right? You have said that she gives you great comfort," the Duke said. Nancy couldn't help but smile at the remark, knowing that the Duchess had been talking to her son about what a joy Celia had been over the past 6 months. "So, really, you do not need me to give you any grandchildren, and you are not all that aged," he added. "Nonsense, my son," she retorted. "Honestly, when do you intend to settle in England and find yourself a wife? You hardly know what you are missing. Trust me when I say, growing old alone is not a good experience." Nancy observed the interaction and could see that there was a tension in this conversation. Quite possibly, it was a matter that the two had disagreed upon in the past. "It is different for me, Mother. You know this," he said. "Oh, fine, fine. My stubborn son, you will ever be," Her Grace said, dropping the topic and taking a sip from her tea. As the silence descended, Nancy was taken aback when the Duke turned to her. "Mrs. Fletcher, my mother has told me that you saved the little girl from the streets. Is that true?" he asked. Nancy was surprised that such a handsome man, and a duke no less, wanted to know anything more about her or Celia. Curiosity about her situation was the last thing that she might have expected from him. "Indeed, Your Grace, I did. She was cold and hungry. I could not bear to see her so neglected," Nancy said. He nodded in satisfaction. "That was very honourable on your part," he said. Nancy cast her eyes down, embarrassed that he should notice her at all, much less to compliment her. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said. The Duchess was eyeing Nancy with a hint of a smile, but she turned to her son once they were silent. "Now, we ought to have a dinner party to celebrate your return." I know that there are many who both expect and desire it, her Grace said. Mother, that is hardly necessary, her son said with a hint of dread. Oh, nonsense, my boy. It must happen. This home has spent far too much time in mourning and sorrow. I need the dinners and balls, you know, the Duchess said, sounding eager and determined. The Duke laughed at her remark and relaxed his shoulders. Well, you ought to have said that in the first place, Mother. You don't need my return as an excuse for a feast. If you desire a dinner party, then we must have one, he said, indulging her. Nancy was glad to see that he cared for his mother enough to set aside his own desires, but just then her thoughts turned to Celia. She had not seen the child all morning. Nancy realised that she must find Celia at once to ensure that she was doing all right. If you will excuse me for just a moment, Your Grace? Nancy requested. Yes, indeed. Do what you must, the Duchess replied with a wave of her hand. Thank you, Your Grace, she said, departing quickly. Nancy knew of 3 favourite spots where she might find Celia, and fortunately discovered her at the second, once she heard the sound of a few keys on the pianoforte. Celia, she said in an urgent whisper. The girl looked up at her with those large green eyes lost in wonder. Celia, darling, we mustn't touch what is not ours, Nancy said, coming to usher Celia away. But listen, Celia replied, enthusiastically, beginning to play a lovely, plucky tune. Nancy smiled with pride, glad for the beauty of Celia's talent and enjoying the music. That is wonderful, my dear. Well done. But you must practice another time. We mustn't be in anyone's way, and we should always have Her Grace's permission before practicing, Nancy said. If she wants to practice, it is quite all right, said a voice from behind them. Nancy turned to see the Duke of Ridlington standing there, watching the two of them. Nancy swallowed and blushed, embarrassed that he should find them there. I am sorry, Your Grace. She enjoys playing a great deal. I ought to have kept a better eye on her, Nancy said, apologising. You needn't be sorry, he said. She is very good, and ought to develop her talents. Thank you, Your Grace, Celia said, making Nancy proud that she was using the proper forms of address. With that, she continued to play. And as she enjoys herself at the pianoforte, would you care to walk with me? The Duke asked Nancy. Her eyes went wide, but she nodded, taking a few steps toward him, but hesitating until he began to lead the walk. So, how has your stay here been so far? He asked. It has been marvellous, Your Grace. Your mother has been most generous and kind to us both, she said. I am glad of that. It would seem that my mother needed to have the both of you around. She certainly seems happier now that you are here. For that, I wish to thank you, he said. Thank me? Nancy asked. I feel a sense of responsibility for her. Ever since my father passed, it has been my duty to see to it that she is cared for. I hate to think that she was lonely and sad while I was away, His Grace said. It was clear to Nancy that the Duke of Ridlington was as kind as his mother. The last thing she had anticipated from a duke was gratitude. Humility seemed to be ingrained in the family, even to the point of thanking their staff. In many ways, all the staff were treated as members of the family, rather than simply the help. Your mother is a joy to work for, as well as to talk to, and Celia has grown very close to her as well, Nancy said. I am glad of that. I would actually like to ask you to join us for dinner this evening. It would be lovely to have the company, as well as a way to show my gratitude to you for having rejuvenated my mother, he said. Nancy's heart raced in panic. Oh, Your Grace, we couldn't possibly, she said. I would like for you to, but the choice is yours. If it would make you too uncomfortable, I understand, but I am certain that Celia would not mind such an event, he said, grinning. "Thank you, Your Grace," Nancy said, consenting. "It shall be done then," he said. "I will see you both at dinner." Nancy was in complete disbelief. She was going to dine with a duke and duchess. That was something she never thought she would have an opportunity to do. More than ever, she appreciated this family. And silly though it was, she found she had grown quite fond of the Duke after their encounter. She only wondered what he would prove to be like as they spent more time together. Chapter 6. Vincent stared at the window of his study, watching Mrs. Fletcher. She was playing with Celia on the lawn. He had never expected to be so intrigued by her. In fact, he had not expected to be so intrigued by anyone. It was Mrs. Fletcher who seemed to be able to bring about this unique feeling in him. He wondered why his mother had never mentioned her in any of her letters. Perhaps it was too painful for her to acknowledge the loss of her former companion. Nevertheless, she certainly seemed to like Mrs. Fletcher. That, in and of itself, was enough to make him happy. Certainly he didn't know what it was about Mrs. Fletcher that interested him so greatly. She seemed like a rather nice woman, but that did not mean she was more special than anyone else. He knew plenty of decent women. He told himself that all of this was simply out of concern for his mother. He wanted her to have a good friend, and he wanted to ensure that Mrs. Fletcher was precisely that. However, he did have to ask himself if that was true. Perhaps he wanted to know her as a woman as well. As he watched Mrs. Fletcher with her charge, he thought of her kind heart and how she was such a good mother to the child. He knew very few women who would be so willing to take in a child that they had not given birth to. He was able to see her character in this gesture. He could see that she was exceptional. Later that evening, Mrs. Fletcher and Celia entered the dining room for dinner as Vincent and his mother sat down. "Ah, good evening," Vincent greeted. "And good evening to you as well," Mrs. Fletcher said, curtsying. "I do hope that you both enjoy the meal very much," his mother added. Celia was clearly excited, looking delighted at the splendour of the table. She had barely acknowledged Vincent, but that did not bother him. He was happy to see the little girl looking around with such anticipation. But more than anything, he was just happy that they were joining them for dinner. He watched Celia slide into her chair. Her flaming red hair was barely visible from where he sat. The poor child was slouched and clearly unaccustomed to such finery. "Celia," he said, "may I show you how to sit at the dinner table?" She nodded enthusiastically. Vincent came over to assist her, smiling at her as he did. "Now, you must keep straight. This slouching will do you no good, and your elbows must remain to your side. They should not be resting up on the table. Do you understand?" Vincent asked. "Yes, sir," she replied. "Excellent," he said. "Now, here is your fork. Take that in your hand," he said. Vincent went on to give her a lesson in the use of all of her utensils, and as the food was scooped onto their plates, Vincent took great care to assist her. He looked up and saw that his mother was staring at him. There was a glimmer in her eyes that told him exactly what she was thinking, and the smile on her face only added to it. He knew that she trusted he would be a good father. Nevertheless, Vincent wasn't thinking along those lines just yet. He still had other things he wished to do before settling down and having a family. They had spoken about this at length, but he could see from her expression that she no longer cared about his feelings. She just wanted to see him happy. Perhaps she wanted to see him with a child of his own. Celia did everything as she had been told, but it was clear that the setting and the food was not only unfamiliar to the child, but also to Mrs. Fletcher. Vincent could see that she did not feel as though she belonged there. Her discomfort was evident in her stilted movements, but he did not wish to draw attention to it. Whereas he could easily instruct Celia, He could hardly give direction to Mrs. Fletcher without her being embarrassed. He began to wonder how she had been treated by other nobles in the past. Had she been given opportunities like this before? Had she been a companion before? Or had she been stuck as a near servant, the way so many others had been? Mrs. Fletcher looked down at her meal. There was something in her eyes, as though she was about to cry. He could not imagine what it was that had struck her so, but once again, Vincent chose not to draw attention to it. The meal continued on in silence. There was very little said, aside from the occasional comment made by Celia about how good the food was. Each time she spoke, it was a breath of fresh air. It brought smiles all around the table. But then they were silent again. "Vincent," his mother began, "I forgot to tell you that I have invited your friends, as well as a few of mine, for a celebratory dinner tomorrow evening. It is just as I had told you we would do." "Is that so, Mother?" he asked. Vincent had not wanted this, but he had known that it was coming. To have to socialise with so many people was not going to thrill him by any means, and after the journey that he had just been on, he simply wanted to spend time with those who meant the most to him. "Yes, well, they are all looking forward to seeing you," she said. "I know that, but I had hoped for a little bit more time before having to see them all. Still, I am sure that it will be a nice gathering," he said. "Of course it will, Vincent," she replied. Vincent turned to Mrs. Fletcher. He knew that he should ask his mother first, but the words came out of his mouth before he had a chance to stop them. "And you, Mrs. Fletcher, will you be joining us?" Vincent asked. She looked up at him, startled, with wide eyes. Tomorrow?" she asked, stuttering. "Yes, tomorrow," he said. "Oh, Your Grace, I do not think such a thing would be possible. It is certainly one thing to dine with you and your mother, but to dine at a table filled with even more nobles than just the two of you, I cannot imagine," she said. "And why is that?" he asked. "Do you not think it would be a shock?" she asked. "To whom?" his mother asked, interjecting with a tone of incredulity. "Well, to the guests, of course," she replied. His mother cleared her throat. "Mrs. Fletcher, you must stop seeing yourself as beneath us," she said. Mrs. Fletcher blushed, looking embarrassed once more. "I see you as a friend and good company. All these months, I do not see you as simply a poor woman or a servant. You are not a matter of charity in my home," she added. Mrs. Fletcher glanced away, humbly. "I cannot thank you enough for your kindness and your words," Mrs. Fletcher said. "It is nothing. Here, we respect all those living under this roof. It has always been so," Vincent said. His mother looked at him, smiling proudly. He had not said it for her sake, but because it was true. Mrs. Fletcher needed to know that. However, Vincent realised that although he said the words, perhaps they were not entirely true. Olivia had never dined with them, even when she was his mother's companion, nor had any of the others. As dinner came to a close, Vincent put his cutlery to the side and stood. Along with the others, he departed from the dining hall, making his way directly to the study. It was then that he found himself approached by none other than Celia. "Your Grace," she began with her sweet, high-pitched voice, "can you teach me how to read and write?" Vincent knelt down and looked into Celia's eyes. "I should like nothing more," he said. "Nancy wants to teach me, but she has found no time." Celia said. "Well then," he said, "I would like very much to help you." Celia surprised him by throwing her arms around his legs. Vincent went stiff, unsure how he was meant to respond to this. He had never been hugged by a child before. In fact, he had never been around children at all. "Thank you," Celia said, squeezing him even more tightly. Vincent leaned back and nodded to her, an awkward smile on his face. "You are very welcome," he said. With that, Celia ran off, happily. Throughout his travels, Vincent had seen a great deal. He had seen how harsh the conditions were for those who are less fortunate than he. Yet somehow he found it extraordinary and admirable that a child such as Celia wanted to be educated. It was not as though she had a reason for it. She simply wished to gain knowledge. She was not a child who had reason to strive for education. She had been raised on the streets, according to what his mother had said. That made her desire all the more inspiring. Of course, it was also inspiring the way that Mrs. Fletcher had taken her in. She had clearly not been a woman of great means, and yet that had not stopped her from accepting the financial burden and responsibility of this child. He wondered what more she would do to prove herself a good woman. "There you are," exclaimed Mrs. Fletcher upon seeing Celia. "Did I not tell you to remain close by? You should not be running off that way. Please, do not worry. You cannot lose her. I know every corner and hiding place there is in this home. I would find her," Vincent promised. Mrs. Fletcher looked embarrassed but smiled at him. "I am sorry if she has disturbed you," she said. "No, she has not. As it happens, I have decided to teach her how to read and write. She asked it of me, and I am more than happy to oblige. I must say that she's a very bright child." "Truly," he said. "But—" She trailed off. "I see it as an investment," Vincent said. He could also see that Mrs. Fletcher was going to apologise, but he had made his decision. He did not wish for an apology when he agreed that this was the best thing for Celia. For the sake of her future and education, it is the correct course to take, he said. "Thank you so much, Your Grace," Mrs. Fletcher said, looking to the ground once more. Her humble eyes were always cast down. However, her eyes came back up. She looked at him and their eyes locked for a moment. He noticed the depth of their colour. They were unlike any he had ever seen before. Realising that he was staring, Vincent tried to compose himself. He nodded to Mrs. Fletcher and decided that he ought to end the conversation. "Well, good evening, Mrs. Fletcher," he said. "Good night, Your Grace," she replied with a curtsy. Vincent wished to retire to his room and go to sleep. However, he could do nothing but think about her eyes. Chapter 7. The next morning the house was abuzz. The maids were busy, the valet was busy, the Dowager Duchess and her son were busy. As they were preparing for the dinner party, everything seemed to be a whirlwind. Nancy helped the Duchess into her dress for a final fitting. As she did so, her employer was informing her of the various men and women who would attend the party. "There is also Lord Chester, who is married to the cousin of royalty. Oh, and Lady Hampton shall also be in attendance, along with many others," she said, brushing her hand away as if the rest of the names escaped her. There were going to be a great many people, and Nancy was growing more and more anxious by the minute. She had never been to a grand party like this. She was not sure how it was going to go, or how it would be accepted that she was present. "It shall be so nice to have you join us. I am looking forward to introducing you, as well as Celia, to all of my friends. I have spoken so much about Celia that I know they are looking forward to meeting her. She has helped me a great deal. To be honest, I was very lonely before you both came," the Duchess said. Nancy nodded politely. Although she was listening to everything that her employer was saying, she was unable to escape her anxieties. She was not sure what it would be like to meet all of those people. They all mattered a lot in society. She had never been to such an event before, even attending small gatherings and dinners with friends back in the tenements. She had never known how to behave. Once she and her husband had a home, they had invited people over, and things were still a struggle for her. In addition to her shyness, being around such titled people at such an event as this, Nancy felt somewhat terrified. I loved my late husband. I know that for women such as myself, marriages are typically arranged based upon convenience," the Duchess said, bringing Nancy out of her reverie. "Well, that is a good thing. It is wonderful that you loved one another despite what was expected," Nancy said. "Indeed, it was wonderful. I had thought that I would never find a man that I would love. However, I was luckier than most. It is a unique thing to find someone that you truly love," she said. Nancy nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Love truly was a rare thing. "You know, we met at a midsummer's festival. It was right here in Somerset. I had only recently arrived to visit my aunt's estate. It was just after losing my father. I was in a terrible state, but my aunt wanted me to go to the party," Her Grace said. "That must have been difficult, to have to go to a party when you were grieving," Nancy said. "Yes, it was. However, it was the best thing I could have done. I met Henry that night. There was a thief at the party, not that we could have known. However, the man took my jewellery. It was my mother's necklace, which held more sentimental value than anything else. I'm sure you can understand," she said. "What a horrible thing!" Nancy exclaimed. As I screamed, Henry ran after the thief. He managed to catch the man and knock him to the ground. He took the necklace back and brought it to me. After that, we talked for hours, she said. Nancy smiled at the story. It was sweet and innocent. It was just the sort of story she loved. I suppose that is what I loved the most about my Henry. We would speak effortlessly for hours on end. From that first night, we were bound to one another, she said. He sounds like a wonderful man, Nancy said. He was, she replied, and so much more. Nancy looked at the Duchess with sadness as a tear slid down her aged cheek. I do apologise if I have encouraged this conversation. I did not mean to bring up painful memories of the past, Nancy said. She was in a similar grief as the Duchess, but hoped that she had not caused any damage. No, darling. There's no need for apologies. I don't even need encouragement. I think of my Henry every waking hour. I miss him terribly, she said, wiping her eyes gently. The tears left little traces of moisture on her skin. I know the feeling, Nancy said. It was difficult enough not to cry when thinking of her own husband. She missed Thomas as well. Although she had no memories that were similar to what the Duchess was describing, he had loved her and she had loved him. She had thought he would be hers forever. In the midst of their mutual sadness, the two women began to hear a bustling downstairs. The guests were arriving. "Oh dear, we had better finish getting ready. I would like for you to wear this dress. It would do us no good for you to be dressed as a lady's maid. You are more than that," Her Grace said. Nancy looked at the green dress that her employer was holding up. She had never imagined that something like that would suit her. After all, she had never worn anything so fine. Would it not only make her stand out more? Wouldn't everyone see her for who she truly was, despite the dazzling outfit? It was not as fancy as the Duchess's dress, but it still felt like a dream. Nancy slipped into the dress and looked at herself in the mirror in shock. It made all the difference. For a moment, she dared to think that she even looked like a lady herself. For a moment, she felt as though she might belong. Good heavens, you look stunning. Now, do you think Celia might be ready to see what I have for her? The Duchess asked. Nancy called for Celia, who came in the room with eagerness in her step. The pink dress Her Grace had prepared looked stunning on the child. Celia's delight was evident. She was so filled with joy. As the Duchess went to greet her guests, Nancy did Celia's hair, styling it up properly. She looked beautiful. They both did. A short time later, they joined the Duchess in the hall. Now, remember to address everyone as my lord and my lady and your grace, if they are a duke or a duchess and so on. Nancy reminded Celia. Celia nodded. I will be polite and proper, she promised. Nancy looked at her and smiled. She was very proud of her. Celia could not have been a sweeter child. They entered the reception hall and saw all of its grandeur, the silver candlesticks, the shimmering drapery that looked as if it had been spun by fairies hanging from the ceiling, the smell of wild blossoms and vanilla. The pianist and violinist played together in a corner, a perfect harmony that made the atmosphere all the more magical. Nancy had to take a deep breath. She could hardly believe the beauty of it all. Somehow, wearing the shining emerald gown, she had become a part of it. The hall was lovely on an ordinary day, but it was far more elaborate for the evening. That, plus all of the women in their beautiful dresses, so similar to what Nancy wore, and the men in their fine cravats and coat-tails, everything was magnificent. Immediately, the Duchess got to work. She started introducing Nancy and Cecilia to all of her friends and guests. You were not exaggerating. She is absolutely lovely, one of the women said, delighted by Celia. I should like nothing more than to have a child like her in my own home, said another. Nancy grinned and placed a hand on Celia's shoulder to encourage her. She was thrilled by the fact that everyone appeared to love the child. However, suddenly Lady Clearburn drew near. Nancy knew there would be an issue. There always was. Such a fuss over this child, she complained. It felt as though she would dislike them whether she had a cause or not. The woman simply could not abide Nancy or Celia. No matter how shy and timid she was, Nancy immediately opened her mouth to reproach Lady Clearburn and speak her mind. But just then, Lady Clearburn looked up and started to greet someone else. There you are, Your Grace. How pleased I am to see you, she said. Nancy instantly turned around to see the Duke of Ridlington standing there. He looked handsome in his coat-tails and cravat. He nodded to Lady Clearburn. Thank you. It is nice to see you as well, he said shortly. Immediately, he walked past her and over to Nancy. Have you met? Lady Clearburn began. But before she could finish, the Duke had already reached Nancy. Nancy saw the woman stare at the Duke's back, dumbfounded. Standing next to Lady Clearburn was a young woman who shared the same pursed lips. It cannot be, the Duke said to Nancy with admiration as he came nearer to her. Your Grace? She asked him. She was not sure what it was he meant, but there was something in his eyes that told her he was giving her a compliment. You look absolutely magnificent in this dress, I dare say, he said. His eyes seemed to be searching her for something. She felt strange being under his gaze this way. Nancy blushed and looked away, embarrassed. She could hardly hold herself steady with him being so near. Thank you, Your Grace. You look rather handsome yourself, she said, causing herself to blush even more. But the Duke beamed at her. His smile was bright and breathtaking. She could see that he was looking at her with an interest that captivated her, despite herself. And where is Celia? He asked, as though trying to break his gaze away from her. I believe she is over there. See? She is entertaining your guests, Nancy replied, gesturing to a small crowd of people laughing as Celia told them a story. She was doing very well in behaving herself and maintaining full propriety. The Duke followed Nancy's eyes and looked over at Celia. He was evidently amused. She has become rather popular, has she not? He asked with a laugh. I must confess that not one of them ever treated me with so much delight when I was a child. She is really very social. If I were her, I would be scared to speak to anyone after living in the streets for over a year at such a young age, Nancy said. Her words were natural, not thinking about what it was that she was saying, but simply reciting the thoughts that came to her mind. Then again, Nancy continued, I have never been one of many words. She has a talent that I shall never even dream of. Truly admirable, indeed, the Duke said. Nancy could still feel his eyes on her face. She looked up at him, feeling the warmth of his nearness. It had been a very long time since she had felt anything like this connection, and for the moment that they stood there, eyes connected by an invisible thread, Nancy wondered if her heart was beginning to mend. "Are you not going to introduce me to your charming friend?" came the voice of a young man who was approaching them. Of course. Mrs. Fletcher, this is Leighton Chadwick, the Marquis of Oakshire. He is my dearest friend, the Duke said. Very nice to meet you, my lord, Nancy said. And you as well, he replied. Lord Oakshire seemed to be a very amiable fellow, and they enjoyed a nice brief conversation before he and the Duke were called away to greet an acquaintance of theirs. Nancy hardly minded. Something was beginning to change within her. Something was waking up. For the rest of the evening, Nancy felt the Duke's constant gaze. Somehow she did not mind. In fact, it thrilled her.
Scan the QR code or click on the link in the description to read the full book. The full audiobook will be available on YouTube in a few days. What did you like the most? Comment below and share this video on your social media and with your friends. Watch one of the following videos. Subscribe to our channel, like this video, and hit the notification bell to not miss any new audiobooks. Thank you for watching.